My second area was a beach town. Kind of nice. I wasn't able to enjoy it because I was a missionary, and missionaries aren't allowed to go in the water or sunbathe. But the town had a lot of charm. When I left my first area to go there, they were like, oh no, that's a poor town. It's gonna suck. But it didn't seem like people were any more poor. They were closer to the city, so people had jobs in the city and stuff. And I got my first Latino companion, which I was stoked for because then I was gonna actually learn Spanish a lot faster. I couldn't sit around and talk English in the apartment and stuff. And he was a pretty great dude for the most part. Some people would call him a slacker, but he had what some of the missionaries called the Latino magic. They would just hang out at people's homes and watch TV and stuff, and then people would get baptized. So we weren't super strict on the rules, but the mission president was stoked because we were baptizing men, and most people would baptize youth and stuff. There's a lot of women and kids in the church. But one day he was saying I was a slacker, and I was like, really, dude? Because I didn't say anything. He was my senior companion, and if we sat and watched half of a bootleg Spider-Man movie or something, I didn't say anything. I was like, this is kind of nice, watch a little bit of a movie. But he was blaming me for it, and I was like, no, dude. He's like, yeah, you're the slacker. And I was like, well, then this next week we're going to obey every single rule to the T. We're going to wake up on time. We're going to do all of our study time. We're going to be out knocking on doors as much as we can. Every single thing to the T. And we did, but it was summer, December, summer down there. And we were just out sweating and working hard every day. And by the end of the week, we both had kind of a silent agreement that we're just going to chill out and go back to normal. There was a lady in the ward that had us teach a whole bunch of her family members, her son and his family, her daughter and her family, and they were all getting baptized. But this one guy, Jair, he was super cool. He let me borrow his Gondwana CDs, which is a Chilean reggae band that was popular at the time. It was really fun listening to reggae there on the cliff, looking down at the ocean and stuff. Everyone was listening to it. But we taught him the missionary discussions. We baptized him. And his wife wasn't there for the discussions because she was working. But she planned on getting baptized. The Chilean government is kind of based on Catholicism, so it's against the law to get divorced in Chile. At least it was at the time. And because of that, the LDS Church's policy was that if people were living together and they weren't married because they couldn't get a divorce with their previous partner, all they would have to do is say, if we could get a divorce and remarry, we would, and then they could get baptized. And that's the position these people were in. She had a kid from a previous marriage. They had a kid together. They've been together for years, and he already got baptized, but the church changed its policy between his baptism and hers, and they said, sorry, you can't get baptized because you're living in sin with this person. It was super disappointing to them. It made no sense to me. I was like, so it was okay for him to get baptized last month, but she can't this month? That's crazy. Me and my companion were walking one day, and these two drunk guys came over, and they're like, hey, do you like Pink Floyd? And I was like, sure, man, they're pretty good. He's like, what does that song mean? But the wall. And I was like, it's saying we're all just a brick in the wall. And he's like, oh, that's crazy, man. He's super drunk, middle of the day. And this other guy comes over and he's drunk, and he's like, you hanging out with the Mormons? And he's like, yeah, they're my friends. And then they started doing the slow motion fight. But the one guy took a bottle and he slowly smashed it over the guy's head. And then blood was just gushing. And we were like, yikes. And we kind of just walked away. And then we knocked on someone's door, and they were like, missionaries, you guys need to go home because the cops are looking for you. because people saw you with this guy that was bleeding. We're like, oh no. Nothing happened though. My next companion there was the grandson of one of the presidents of the church, and he seemed to think he was pretty special. On P days, he would have deep discussions with other missionaries, and I'd try and join, and they'd be like, no other house, leave it to the big boys. And I'm pretty sure I knew a lot more about the church than they did. I was really thirsty for knowledge. We could read scriptures, or we could read the missionary library, and I read the whole thing to get any information I could. One day I was at P-Day reading Gospel Principles, and it kind of goes over some basic stuff, but I was reading that while some missionaries were playing soccer, and they're like, hey, other house, why don't you play soccer? And I was like, I'm reading, and one of them was like, yeah, he's got to learn about the basic teachings of the church. That was funny, because later I was talking about how Joseph Smith said that our dead ancestors can read our thoughts and are sometimes pained by that. And he's like, that's not true. Where'd you hear that? And I was like, here in Gospel Principles. Well, after I read the whole missionary library, I was excited to read more, and my companion had Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith, compiled by Joseph F. Smith. And I was like, oh, dude, can I read that? And he's like, sure. So I was reading it, and I found some interesting things in there. But he took me aside one day. He's like, Elder House, I'm really concerned that you're not reading the Book of Mormon every day because you're reading the book I lent you. And I was like, you're right. I'll make sure to read a half hour of the Book of Mormon and this book. But now I think it's so dumb. Like, he's like, don't read that book by Joseph Smith. Read this other book by Joseph Smith. But I was coming close to a year of being someone else, not really being able to fully be myself. It was kind of taking a toll on me. I missed my life at home, playing in rock bands and stuff. But I thought of the scripture that says, he who finds his life shall lose it, but he who loses his life for my sake shall find it. And I was like, being a missionary is definitely losing my life for the Lord's sake. So hopefully I'll be blessed. Things will be good when I get home because of my service here. But I tried to make a difference. I didn't have a guitar to play in this area, but a couple times I saw kids playing guitar like in the park, and I'd sit down and play a Nirvana song with them, and they'd be like, whoa, you guys can play cool songs? Thought you guys were just nerdy and talked about Jesus stuff. And I felt like I was helping the church out, giving the church a good name. Sometimes in the evening in that park, they do capoeira, like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, dancing, and I would help them play the music, like on this like stringed instrument, or play the drums. That was pretty fun. One night we were in our apartment with the window open because it was hot, big mosquitoes were coming in, and I could hear this band Gloop was down a couple miles away playing a live show, but we had to be indoors, and I was like, man, I wish we could just go watch that concert. That'd be a lot of fun. But I just sat in my bed that had a lot of fleas in it. All of my beds were infested with fleas for 2 years. I had white sheets. I'd wake up in the morning, there'd be red blood spots all over the sheets because I'd roll over on these little bugs that were sucking my blood, and they would like barf up my blood, and so leave blood all over. I remember sitting on the toilet in that place watching these fleas just jump on my legs, and the mosquito bites were pretty big. It started getting cold again, so I put a winter hat on for my ears, and my zone leader saw me with the winter hat on, and he's like, Other House, you like wearing beanies? And I was like, When it's cold, yeah. And he went into the mission office and he told the president that I was wearing a beanie. And then he came back and he said, there's a new rule. You can't wear beanies. And I was like, even when it's cold out, I can't cover my ears? They're like, no, you can't. So I went to my next area and we actually had some frost and stuff. And I didn't wear my beanie because it was against the rules. And the mamita, the lady at the house, was like, that's ridiculous. You need to put a hat on. I was like, they told us we can't. I'll talk about that area next. It was the closest to the Andes mountain range that my mission went.